Guys, thanks ever so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. I've got around 10 to 15 minutes ahead of me now, just to talk a little bit about total profitability, but to talk about it in practical terms, what it means for hotels and how you can look at total profitability. So let's talk about total profitability and just get a little bit of an understanding of what it is and what it means to hotels. So to understand total profitability, you have to look at the multiple revenue streams a hotel has, the costs attached to it, but also the channels that you're distributing via. Thanks, Chris. Things to take into account when you're looking at total profitability. The first one is guest spend or revenue streams. Understanding what is delivering revenue into your hotels, whether that's room revenue, F&B, spa, golf, as we heard earlier. And it's really getting an understanding of what revenue that's driving and how the guest is spending that at your property. The second thing to understand is cost management. Looking at your variable costs, cleaning, utilities, staffing, etc. And a great example of how extended stay providers look at cost management is understanding the value of length of stay to their business. So on a single night stay, you have to turn that room over. That has to be cleaned. But on a longer length of stay, maybe you only clean that room, turn that room over once per week. So actually, how can I adjust my pricing to take into account the cost of clean? What is my optimal price point? What is my optimal length of stay? Then a big factor in cost management is channel management. Understanding your distribution. How much does it cost me to acquire a guest into my property? How do I set a strategy to make sure that the revenue I'm left with at the bottom line is as much as possible? And finally, guest behavior. Now, guest behavior is a really interesting one because when you understand your guest behavior, you can start to serve them up personalized content, personalized offerings, personalized packages and promotions, and really start to drive additional spend even before the guest stays at the property. If you have a guest that books 8 weeks before, you can start to market to that guest. Can we offer them a room upgrade? Can we offer them a food and beverage package? Can we offer them a late checkout? And actually, a stat that I'd like to share, Chris, sorry, next slide, please, is that what we've seen at Duetto through our market-leading integration with Oki is that via upselling prior to guest arrival, we've been able to drive 45% higher guest spend on ancillary services. So that could be F&B packages, that could be golf, that could be gym passes, whatever that may be. But working with Oki to understand what is the optimal time to target this guest. What has this guest done previously? When they've checked in, have they added breakfast at check-in? Can we do that beforehand? That's really what's helping drive that 45%. So why does profitability matter now more than ever? I think we can all agree that profitability is super important, but historically, there's always been a higher focus on top-line revenue management, particularly in years gone by. But actually, that focus on profitability now is so important because of the rise in operating costs, fluctuating demand, and increased distribution fees. Chris, next slide, please. Thank you. So let's look at the elements of a dynamic revenue strategy that focuses on profitability. There needs to be an emphasis on managing all of your revenue streams. You have to take into account all of your ancillary revenue opportunities, including F&B, meetings, events, golf, spa, parking. You need to have the data to measure and analyze the total guest value. And data is super important. Data can be held in multiple systems, multiple places. How can you bring that data into one place? How can you aggregate that data very quickly? And how can you take actionable insights with that data? Something that I talk about a lot, and I'm very fortunate that I get to talk to hotels and revenue managers, commercial leaders most days, is about democratizing data. The revenue manager or the commercial leader shouldn't be the gatekeeper to data. Democratizing data and allowing all of the departments to understand the input they have into revenue targets, into profitability targets, is really how you get buy-in from everybody in the team. And I always talk about it's not just the revenue manager that's responsible for revenue and profit, it's everybody in the hotel. You know, how does the operations director manage the number of cleaning staff that they have on duty, manage the number of waiting staff they have in the outlets? How does housekeeping ensure that as they go around, they're turning off all of the lights? How do you allocate rooms if you know that you're only 80% occupied? Can you take one floor out of service for an evening so you're not using any electricity costs? Everybody should be bought in to the theme of driving profitability. You also need to look at creating a channel strategy that maximizes profits. And this is a really interesting one. It's very easy to say, okay, on nights where I know I'm going to fill, I'm going to close out my OTAs and I'm going to sell on cheaper channels. But then you have to factor in, what impact does that have? Where does that put my ranking on that OTA? Does that affect my conversion in the future? So yes, I'm making a small gain on the nights where I'm full because I'm driving greater revenue to the bottom line, but it means I go from page 1 to page 2 on Google in the future, and that has a 5% hit on my OTA. So you have to factor all of these things, not just looking at channel costs, but also the value that they deliver. You then need to delve into, what are my guests contributing by channel, by segment? We spoke about it earlier on the panel, but understanding, hey, on average, an OTA guest drives £40 of revenue when they stay on property. That's predominantly done in the restaurant. Whereas my director brand guest, they buy a day pass for the gym, they eat in the restaurant, they spend in the bar. By understanding the total spend of that guest and what channel they come via, you can then start to create unique channel strategies. Next slide, please, Chris. Loyalty. We spoke about this earlier as well on one of the panels, but having the ability to create loyal guests and bring guests back to your hotels via cheap distribution channels is really, really important. A loyal guest tends to spend more on property and they're much easier to forecast. Finally, unify marketing and revenue teams. This should actually say unify all teams, because teams should have aligned targets. If you have a revenue manager that is targeted on forecast accuracy or RGI performance, and you have a corporate sales manager who's targeted on the number of corporate room nights they can deliver, those two targets are not necessarily aligned. You may have a group sales manager that's targeted on delivering X amount of revenue in groups. Again, is that right for the business? So coming back to setting aligned targets, democratizing that data, because it's very difficult. And I've been there myself as a corporate sales manager on property, where you shout across a busy reservation office to the revenue manager, hey guys, I've got this group, can we take it? No. I used to walk out in a huff because I'm not hitting my group target. But by democratizing the data and understanding, hey, Dave, we're not taking this group because actually on that night it's going to displace higher revenue business. That means we're not going to achieve our overall target. None of us are going to get our bonuses. That's a fair bit easier for me to take. So again, unifying the teams, democratizing the data, and aligning all of the targets as well. Chris, thank you. This is also a really interesting one. How do you measure your hotel's performance? Now, if I speak to an average of 10 hoteliers per week, I would say I probably get at least 5 or 6 different metrics depending on who I speak to. Forecast accuracy, RevPAR, TrevPAR, RGI, sorry Chris, next stage as well please, Net RevPAR, GoPAR. There are so many different ways to analyze your business, but it has to work from a profitability perspective. Nothing drives me more crazy when I speak to a revenue manager and they say, yeah, but all of my commission, or sorry, all of my bonus is linked to forecast accuracy. Okay, so if there's opportunities in the market to drive greater revenue and make your hotel more profitable, you're not going to do it. Every one of them says, no, of course I would. Most of them are lying because they want to get their bonus at the end of the year, right? So it comes back again to setting the right criteria for people to be measured on, understanding what the ambition of that property or that group is trying to do and how everybody's input feeds into that overall metric. Chris, next slide, please. Thank you. So how does an RMS optimize for profit? This is very much looking at business mix. This is about understanding total guest spend and trying to marry the two together. How do you get the right guest in the right room at the right rate who spends the right amount of money on your hotel? So sometimes you may have to sacrifice on rate. because you know the additional spend attached to it is going to outweigh the room-only revenue. Groups is another one where you can look at, okay, I can sacrifice on the room rate because I know they're taking a meeting room like here today. We know they're going to spend on AV. We know they're going to spend on F&B. They also want to book a group dinner in the restaurant in the evening. So I'll sacrifice my room revenue to drive that total revenue. Chris, next one, please. Last couple of slides for me, and I'll hand it over. So personalized pricing is something the industry's spoken about for a long time, and it feels like it hasn't got much closer. However, there are hotels, and in particular casinos, and I'll give two examples of this afterwards, that are really able to deliver personalized pricing looking at the total value of that guest. So coming back to what I mentioned there, how much does this guest spend on property? If we're talking about casinos, how much do they spend in my casino? What is the overall value for that guest? And what rate do I need to deliver to them to ensure they come to my property instead of another property? Chris, next slide, please, if it's okay. Now, I've just got two examples where casino customers are using Duetto and personalized pricing to great effect. So with casinos, the big driver, as I mentioned earlier, is how much money are people going to lose on my casino floor? How much money are they going to spend in my restaurant? How much money are they going to spend in the theatre that's attached? All of these wonderful things. Now, casinos are not particularly concerned with room revenue, unlike hotels. But what they've done by linking their CRM system to Duetto is assign a player worth to each guest that comes into that hotel. They will have a unique reference number that is attached to a player worth or a dollar amount that that guest brings. By doing that, Duetto will make a recommended rate served to that guest or potential guest to entice them into that hotel. So some people do it by tiers, other people do it by unique identifiers. So if you want to bring in a high roller into one of your casinos, you're not concerned about charging them a high rate for their room or their apartment, whatever that may be. Duetto has the ability to look at who is booking via the booking engine, understand the player worth, and serve up a tailored rate to them to attract the right guest into the hotel. Chris, next slide, please. And final slide from me, and then if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yielding other revenue streams, really, really important. And one of the things that we find the casinos doing, particularly on the Las Vegas Strip, is yielding cabana spaces and yielding pool cabanas, because it's perishable inventory. It's an inventory that you can monitor demand. You can see a booking curve. Why would you not dynamically price that? So instead of having a flat fee of $200 that you would charge for a cabana on any given day, you can yield that the same way you would yield a hotel room as well. High demand periods, you charge more. Low demand periods, you charge less. And we've even now seen some hotels in the US starting to yield RV spaces and camping spaces. Again, by demand, the same way you would do with a hotel. Look at the size of the space that they have, look at the demand for that property, and push out a dynamic rate into that market. We see it in the UK now as well, where we're working with some campsites who say, hey, we've got fixed inventory, it's perishable, and we've got distribution channels very similar to hotels. People come in and book via our booking engine. So you can dynamically price that as well. With that, that is my last slide, I think, Chris. I will open up to any questions if there is any, or I will hand over to the next speaker. Please.
How do you marry up the CRM system to Duetto? What kind of exchange of data do you have?
It's an interesting one. So we have two ways of doing it. We can connect to the CRM and we can bring in guest profile. So for us, really, it's not about all of the data in the CRM. It's about understanding the worth of that data. So total spend that they bring in, and we can do that via a unique identifier. We can also do it via the PMS, where we can bring in a unique identifier. It's a little less personalized in that instance. We would bucket them. So we would say, okay, tier 1 is low spend, tier 2 slightly higher, all the way up to tier 10. When one of those unique identifiers, we see that via the booking engine, we can then push that rate back out to them in a personalized way. But it's not the same for all PMS integrations. And at the moment, we have 1.5 CRM integrations. The half works, but we could get better data from it.
How are you profiling the high rollers? Is it because they stayed there before, or is it just a profile built for the other factors?
I have to say I'm not the casino expert working here in London. However, we do work with a lot of membership groups, people like Soho House as well, who actually have a very similar model. Because it's membership, you can only book via the brand.com. So ultimately you own that guest. So when they log on with a unique identifier the same way as the casino guests would do. But yes, you would have to look at historical spend for that. So the same way you would capture data on guest folio if you're working in a hotel, it would be done the same way in a casino. They would have a card that they would go around and they would have a spend limit on it. That would all be tracked back to the profile. And then you can see historically, hey, last time they come with us, they spent X and they lost Y in the casino. So moving forward, we need to treat them differently.